The morning began like any other, with the sun creeping through the blinds, casting soft patterns across the polished hardwood floors of Judge Vanessa Harper's home. To the outside world, she was composed, elegant, a figure of authority in her black robes, the weight of the law resting on her shoulders. But this morning, as she sipped her coffee, there was a gnawing sense in her gut, a quiet premonition she couldn't quite shake. Vanessa had always been meticulous, precise, a mind honed by years of law school, internships, and finally, her appointment to the bench as one of the youngest black judges in the state's history. Every decision she made in the courtroom was deliberate, every word measured. Yet outside the walls of her chambers, in the unstructured reality of the world, the same meticulous control could be fragile, vulnerable. She understood this better than most. It was on this morning that she received the call that would unravel the ordinary into the extraordinary. The precinct had summoned her to assist in a routine oversight, something procedural, something that on paper seemed innocuous. "We need your presence to mediate," the officer said casually. They had no idea of the identity of the woman they were summoning. Vanessa, bound by her professional integrity, complied without hesitation. She dressed sharply, a tailored navy suit replacing her judicial robes, and stepped out into the crisp, morning air, unaware that the events about to unfold would test every fiber of her being. Arriving at the precinct, she was met not with the formal recognition one might expect for a judge, but with suspicion, impatience, and subtle hostility. The air was thick with the unspoken tension of a place where authority was not just exercised, but tested especially by those who did not anticipate having to answer to it. Vanessa's presence was largely overlooked. She was ushered to a back room, ostensibly for a procedural matter that required her input. The room smelled of antiseptic and stale coffee, fluorescent lights flickering intermittently. As she was seated, the officers exchanged glances, murmuring quietly among themselves. It was then that the ordeal began. Without explanation, without formal charges or warnings, one officer approached her with clippers, insisting on a safety protocol, a preposterous justification for what they intended. Vanessa froze. Words failed her in that moment, as the absurdity of the situation collided with the gravity of her presence. Her hair, carefully maintained, a crown she wore not just for aesthetic, but as a symbol of her identity, was shaved away in moments. The clippers buzzed ominously, each stroke a stark reminder of the dehumanizing power wielded by those who underestimate the dignity of black women. Vanessa sat motionless, a mixture of shock and suppressed anger coursing through her veins. Her heart pounded, not just from fear, but from the indignity, the audacity of the men in uniform who had no inkling of the justice she represented, nor the authority she commanded. Yet, in the midst of humiliation, Vanessa's mind remained clear. Her years on the bench had taught her to measure, to calculate, to remain unshaken. Every second of this grotesque display was recorded in her memory, not for vengeance, not for humiliation, but as evidence. She noted their faces, their hesitations, the arrogance that blinded them to the truth. She recalled the faces of her mentors, her mother's voice, her father's guidance, reminders of resilience, pride, and the unyielding strength that had brought her here. When the officers finally stepped back, satisfied with their act, a chilling silence enveloped the room. Vanessa stood, her presence commanding even without her hair. She adjusted her suit, straightened her posture, and spoke, not in anger, not in accusation, but in a voice that radiated authority and restraint. "Gentlemen," she said, her tone calm but unyielding, "I am the presiding judge over the very case you are involved in. Your actions today will be documented, and justice will be served." For a brief moment, confusion flickered across their faces. The realization, slow and deliberate, settled in like a storm breaking over calm waters. Their casual arrogance was met with the immutable weight of the law, embodied in a black woman whose very life had been shaped by the struggle against injustice. Vanessa's presence, her calm assertion, transformed the room from a site of humiliation into a courtroom of accountability, even before formal proceedings began. She left the precinct that day not in defeat, but in resolve. Each step back, too, her car was deliberate, measured, a silent declaration of self-possession. Vanessa understood that this incident was more than personal. It was emblematic of the systemic arrogance and implicit bias that Black professionals, particularly Black women, navigate daily. Her mind raced with legal strategies, civil complaints, and the inevitable public scrutiny that would follow. But beyond the law, Vanessa carried the knowledge of her own dignity, unshaken by the clippers of ignorance and prejudice. As she drove home, the city seemed different, sharper. The faces she passed on the street, the hurried commuters, the indifferent, pedestrians, all of it felt like part of a larger narrative she was now living firsthand. Vanessa's resolve solidified into purpose. She would not allow this indignity to be silenced. Her story would not just be a personal recount. It would become a testament to the resilience, intelligence, and unbreakable spirit of Black women in positions of authority. Back in her home, she removed her coat, set her keys down, and paused in front of the mirror. The reflection that stared back was transformed yet unbowed. Her hairless head reflected the world's attempt to diminish her, but it also reflected her triumph over fear, over disrespect, over the audacity of those who failed to see her humanity. She touched her scalp, a gesture of both reclamation and defiance. The crown had shifted from strands of hair to an indomitable spirit, a mind sharpened by years of struggle and study, and a heart steeled by the knowledge that dignity is never given. It is asserted. That evening, Vanessa drafted her statement. Every word was precise, every sentence deliberate. She documented not only the event itself, but the subtle indignities, the facial expressions, the microaggressions, the assumptions that had led to the act. This was her armor, her weapon in the fight not just for herself, but for justice, for accountability, for a broader societal recognition of the professionalism and authority of Black women. In the quiet of her study, Vanessa allowed herself a moment of reflection. She thought of her childhood, of the lessons her parents had instilled about pride and perseverance. She thought of the young girls watching her now, who might one day face similar challenges, and she realized that her response would echo far beyond the walls of her chambers or the precinct. It would become a beacon, a story of courage, dignity, and the unwavering assertion of self in the face of ignorance. And so, the first part of her journey concluded not with vengeance, but with a steadfast preparation for the justice to come. Vanessa Harper, though temporarily stripped of a part of her physical identity, remained intact in the most vital ways. Her intellect, her authority, her unshakable dignity were untouched. She would confront the perpetrators not as victims, but as the embodiment of law, fairness, and the enduring strength of Black excellence. The next morning, Vanessa Harper arrived at the courthouse, her mind sharpened and her resolve absolute. She had spent the night drafting her motions, reviewing legal precedents, and preparing for the confrontation she knew was inevitable. The precinct's actions could not and would not go unanswered. Her authority as a judge was not a title to be ignored. It was a responsibility, a beacon of justice that demanded acknowledgement even from those who had attempted to diminish her. Walking through the marbled halls, Vanessa noticed the subtle nods and glances from colleagues who had heard whispers of the incident. Some expressed concern, others quiet admiration, but all recognized the gravity of what had occurred. The courtroom was a sanctuary where the law was not just a set of rules, but a living embodiment of fairness, dignity, and order. And today that sanctuary would witness a reckoning unlike any it had seen before. The officers, summoned under formal charges for misconduct and abuse of authority, entered the courtroom with the casual arrogance that had characterized their behavior at the precinct. But here, in the presence of Judge Harper, that arrogance began to crumble. They did not yet understand the full weight of the woman before them, nor the meticulous legal mind that had prepared every argument, every piece of evidence, every narrative to dismantle their impunity. Vanessa rose to speak, her voice calm yet commanding, each word a deliberate strike of authority. She recounted the events with clarity, avoiding hyperbole, yet imbuing every statement with the moral weight of the violation she had endured. She described the pretense of safety protocols, the grotesque act of shaving her hair, the humiliation, and the blatant disregard for her position and humanity. As she spoke, the courtroom absorbed the truth with a collective intake of breath. This was no exaggeration, no anecdotal complaint. It was a meticulous recounting of injustice, laid bare before the law. Evidence followed, security footage from the precinct, witness statements from other staff, and meticulous notes Vanessa had taken during the ordeal. Each piece painted a portrait of arrogance and systemic disregard, yet also highlighted the resilience, dignity, and precision of the woman who stood before them. The officers attempted to interject, their voices tinged with disbelief, but Vanessa's command silenced them. Every objection was met with reasoned counterpoints, every attempt to diminish her authority countered by the undeniable truth. The courtroom watched, rapt, as the proceedings unfolded. This was more than a case of personal indignity. It was a confrontation with the subtle, often invisible biases that allowed authority to be abused. Vanessa's demeanor, composed, unyielding, resolute, transformed what could have been a spectacle of humiliation into a lesson in justice and accountability. The officers realized, too late, that their ignorance had placed them in a position where not even their uniform could shield them from the law. Outside the courtroom, the story began to circulate. Local media picked up the narrative, framing it as both shocking and instructive. Headlines highlighted the audacity of the officers and the remarkable composure of Judge Harper. Social media erupted, with commentators and citizens alike expressing outrage, admiration, and solidarity. Vanessa understood the dual-edged nature of this attention. It amplified the injustice, yet it also amplified the accountability that had been so long denied in countless similar situations across the nation. In the days that followed, internal investigations within the precinct confirmed the details Vanessa had provided. The officers faced disciplinary actions, suspensions, and public scrutiny. More importantly, the case sparked conversations about systemic bias, procedural integrity, and the respect owed to all professionals, particularly Black women who navigate spaces historically hostile to their authority. Vanessa Harper had not just sought justice for herself, she had illuminated the broader patterns of discrimination that demanded societal attention and structural change. Through it all, Vanessa maintained her dignity. She refused to allow the humiliation of the act to define her identity. Instead, she leveraged it as a catalyst for awareness, accountability, and empowerment. Her public statements, measured yet firm, spoke to the resilience of Black women in positions of power and the moral imperative of recognizing their authority without prejudice or assumption. She emphasized that respect was not optional, nor was accountability selective. It was a universal expectation, foundational to the integrity of any institution. For Vanessa, the personal impact of the ordeal was profound. She had been stripped of her hair, yes, but in doing so, the world witnessed the unbreakable spirit that no physical act could diminish. She returned to her chambers, seated once more at the bench, not as a woman recovering from an affront, but as a judge whose authority had been tested and reaffirmed. The courtroom became a stage upon which dignity, intellect, and perseverance triumphed over ignorance and arrogance. Her family, friends, and mentees watched with pride as Vanessa's story unfolded. Young Black girls, seeing a woman assert herself in the face of blatant disrespect, saw not only a role model but a blueprint for resilience. They saw that authority was not merely a title or a uniform. It was an active, living embodiment of justice, courage, and integrity. Vanessa's experience became a narrative thread in the larger tapestry of Black excellence, a reminder that even in moments of vulnerability, strength and dignity could prevail. In reflection, Vanessa understood the complexity of the event. It was simultaneously a personal affront, a societal lesson, and a testament to the power of resilience. She had navigated fear, humiliation, and systemic bias with grace, emerging not diminished but amplified. Her hair had been taken, but her voice, her intellect, and her authority remained untouchable. The incident became a defining moment, not for the malice of the perpetrators, but for the courage, composure, and moral clarity of the woman they underestimated. As the weeks passed, the precinct implemented new training, revised protocols, and emphasized respect for all professionals, regardless of race or gender. While no act of reform could undo the immediate indignity, Vanessa's actions ensured that such an incident would not be repeated. The story became a case study, cited in law schools and professional development seminars, illustrating the intersection of authority, bias, and accountability. Vanessa Harper's life continued, as it always had, with a balance of personal integrity and professional excellence. Yet the incident became a landmark in her career, not for notoriety, but for the affirmation of her resilience and the broader message it sent. She continued to preside over cases with the same meticulous care, but now with a renewed sense of purpose, a commitment to justice that extended beyond the courtroom to the very fabric of institutional and societal accountability. In the final reflection, Vanessa understood that dignity is not conferred by circumstance, nor is respect negotiated in the face of prejudice. It is asserted, maintained, and defended. Her story, the story of a black woman presiding over a courtroom that once failed to recognize her authority, became an enduring testament to courage, pride, and the unassailable power of integrity. And in the quiet moments, when she removed her robe and returned to the sanctuary of her home, she smiled at the reflection in the mirror. The woman staring back was unchanged in essence, yet transformed by experience, stronger, wiser, and unyielding. Her hair might have been temporarily taken, but her spirit, her voice, and her authority remained untouchable. Vanessa Harper had faced ignorance and emerged not just victorious, but emblematic of the unbreakable strength of black excellence. Months had passed since that fateful morning when Vanessa Harper's hair was forcibly removed by the very officers she was tasked to oversee. The world had moved on, or at least it seemed so on the surface, but the ripples of that day continued to spread, touching lives in ways both profound and subtle. For Vanessa, the ordeal had not been erased. It had been transformed into purpose. She carried the memory not as a wound, but as a lens, one that revealed the persistence of bias, the fragility of assumptions, and the power of dignified resistance. Her courtroom became more than a place of legal adjudication. It was a stage for societal introspection. Each case she presided over reminded her that justice was not merely about enforcing rules. It was about setting standards, modeling integrity, and demanding accountability at every level. Her presence alone served as a daily challenge to those who underestimated the authority of black women, or who assumed that decorum and respect were negotiable. Every ruling she made, every decision she articulated carried the weight of experience, shaped not only by her education and intellect, but by the lived reality of having been underestimated, humiliated, and tested in the most personal of ways. Vanessa also began speaking publicly, not in anger, but in reflection. At conferences, panels, and community events, she shared her story as a testament to resilience. She spoke of humiliation transformed into empowerment, of fear met with strategy, of prejudice confronted with unwavering authority. Her narrative resonated deeply, particularly with young black professionals who navigated spaces still riddled with systemic bias. Many reached out to her personally, sharing their own experiences of being overlooked, doubted, or demeaned. Vanessa listened, offering guidance and affirmation, showing that one act of courage, rooted in dignity and self-respect, could catalyze broader change. The public attention had also sparked institutional change. The precinct, previously indifferent, to accountability, implemented mandatory anti-bias and cultural competency training for all staff. Protocols regarding treatment of black professionals and women in authority were revised and codified. Vanessa's case became a reference point in legal journals, civil rights discussions, and educational seminars. It was studied not merely as an incident, but as a paradigm shift, an instance where a single person's courage compelled an entire institution to confront its failures. Yet beyond policy and protocol, Vanessa's story resonated on a human level. Friends noted subtle changes in her demeanor, a sharper presence, a quiet confidence that didn't need declaration, a calm assurance that came from having confronted a crisis and emerged not only unbroken, but strengthened. Her family, who had endured sleepless nights worrying for her safety, took solace in seeing the tangible outcomes of her courage. Her parents, both community activists, often remarked that Vanessa had embodied lessons they had instilled from childhood. Dignity is not conditional, courage is not optional, and integrity is non-negotiable. Vanessa herself reflected frequently on the personal transformations she had experienced. She began journaling, capturing both her inner thoughts and the wider societal implications of her experience. She explored how systems of power often operate invisibly, how assumptions can blind those in authority, and how the assertion of one's dignity can disrupt patterns of oppression. Her writing became a form of therapy, yes, but also a blueprint, a map for others who might find themselves in moments of professional or personal vulnerability. But the impact wasn't only outward-facing. Vanessa confronted her own emotions with a rigor as disciplined as any legal analysis. She acknowledged anger, frustration, and humiliation, but she refused to be consumed by them. Instead, she transformed these feelings into motivation, a quiet, unrelenting force that propelled her work, guided her mentorship, and sharpened her focus on systemic justice. She understood that to dwell on the act itself would diminish its power. To use it as a springboard for education, reform, and advocacy would immortalize its lessons. In the community, Vanessa's story became a symbol. Local schools invited her to speak to students about resilience and leadership. Young girls, some barely old enough to grasp the significance of the law, found in her an aspirational figure, someone who had faced dehumanization yet emerged with dignity intact. She emphasized that authority is never granted solely by title, but by the consistent demonstration of integrity, competence, and courage. Through these interactions, Vanessa realized that her experience, though personal, had acquired collective significance. It was no longer just her story. It was a narrative woven into the broader tapestry of Black excellence and resistance. The officers involved faced professional consequences, of course, but the greater victory was the cultural shift that Vanessa's actions precipitated. Within months, she observed subtle but tangible changes. Colleagues who had previously overlooked Black authority now paused before making assumptions. New hires were oriented with a sensitivity to dignity and respect. The precinct began collaborating with community organizations to improve transparency and accountability. Vanessa Harper's ordeal had become a catalyst, demonstrating that the assertion of justice and the embodiment of resilience could reverberate far beyond the walls of a single courtroom. Yet, even as policies changed and reputations were adjusted, Vanessa remained grounded in the personal truths that mattered most. She embraced her identity fully, her intellect, her authority, her heritage, and yes, even her hair, which she now wore proudly, unbound by societal expectations or attempts at control. She understood that true resilience is not merely surviving adversity, but transforming it into a force for collective empowerment. Her reflection in the mirror each morning was a reminder. The world may attempt to diminish you, but it cannot take the dignity you assert and maintain. Vanessa also forged new mentorships, dedicating time to support Black professionals navigating fields historically resistant to their authority. She counseled them on the importance of self-assertion, strategic documentation, and principled advocacy, tools that had protected her when she faced humiliation and that could empower others facing similar systemic challenges. Through her mentorship, Vanessa multiplied the impact of her experience, ensuring that one act of courage could ripple outward, touching countless lives with lessons of resilience, dignity, and integrity. The story of Vanessa Harper ultimately became one of transformation, a testament to the power of steadfastness, intellect, and self-respect. She had faced humiliation, bias, and ignorance, yet had turned it into an enduring narrative of empowerment. Her actions reaffirmed that the struggle against injustice is both personal and societal, that courage is as much about composure as confrontation, and that dignity, once asserted, becomes an unassailable force. In quiet moments, she reflected on the journey from that first morning at the precinct to the systemic changes her actions had precipitated. The incident had exposed a painful vulnerability, yes, but it had also illuminated the enduring strength that comes from self-possession and moral clarity. Vanessa Harper understood that her story was not only about her survival, but about the broader affirmation of Black authority, excellence, and resilience. And so, as she returned to her chambers each day, taking her seat at the bench with the calm authority that had become her trademark, Vanessa Harper carried with her the knowledge that true power lies not in uniform, title, or recognition, but in the unwavering assertion of dignity, integrity, and justice. Her hair had been taken, her patience tested, but her spirit and the lesson she embodied remained untouchable. In the reflection of her life, the world could see not humiliation, but triumph, not vulnerability, but unyielding strength. Not the loss of a crown, but the assertion of an unbreakable soul. Years had passed since that morning at the precinct, yet the memory of it remained vivid in Vanessa Harper's mind, not as a wound, but as a compass. The incident, once a source of shock and humiliation, had become the defining lens through which she viewed her work, her community, and her place in the world. It had taught her that courage is not always loud, that strength is not always visible, and that the assertion of dignity can transform not just personal experience, but entire institutions. Vanessa's influence continued to grow. She was no longer just a judge. She had become a symbol. In courtrooms, conference halls, and community centers, her presence carried authority that transcended the traditional markers of power. People sought her counsel not only for her legal expertise, but for her wisdom on navigating spaces where bias and prejudice lingered, often invisible but profoundly felt. Vanessa understood that the true measure of leadership is not just how one responds in calm circumstances, but how one asserts integrity in moments of profound challenge. Her story had inspired reforms beyond the precinct. Local law enforcement agencies adopted new protocols emphasizing respect for authority and cultural sensitivity. Workshops were developed to train officers on recognizing and addressing implicit bias, and young Black professionals were invited to speak alongside law enforcement in mentorship programs. Vanessa's experience had become a blueprint for systemic accountability, demonstrating that a single act of courage could catalyze enduring change. But beyond institutional reform, Vanessa's journey resonated on a deeply personal level with countless individuals. Letters, emails, and calls from across the country poured in, stories of young women facing discrimination, professionals being underestimated, and communities struggling to assert dignity in the face of systemic bias. Vanessa read each one carefully, responding with guidance, encouragement, and empathy. She became a living testament to the idea that resilience is not only personal, but generational. A gift shared through mentorship example, and the steady demonstration of integrity. Through it all, Vanessa remained grounded in her own humanity. She reflected often on the intersection of vulnerability and power, understanding that true strength lies not in invulnerability, but in the courage to confront injustice with both intelligence and composure. She emphasized that dignity is not conferred by recognition or title. It is maintained through consistent assertion, principled action, and unwavering self-respect. Her reflections became a guide for others navigating professional and societal spaces that were, too often, unprepared to recognize the authority of Black women. Vanessa also embraced the personal growth that had emerged from the ordeal. She experimented with new forms of self-expression, from art to public speaking, using her experiences to explore the broader themes of identity, resilience, and empowerment. She encouraged others to reclaim symbols of their own identity, whether physical, cultural, or professional, and to understand that the assertion of self is both a personal act and a societal statement. The shaving of her hair, once intended to humiliate, had inadvertently become a metaphor for the stripping away of fear, doubt, and inhibition, revealing a deeper, unassailable strength beneath. Her courtroom work evolved as well. Vanessa approached each case not only with legal precision, but with a profound awareness of systemic inequities. She sought not only to enforce the law, but to illuminate patterns of bias, to challenge assumptions, and to cultivate fairness in both procedure and perception. Her decisions became models of equitable reasoning, blending intellect with lived experience, and ensuring that justice was not merely procedural, but fundamentally human. The broader community began to recognize the ripple effects of her resilience. Local schools incorporated her story into curricula focused on leadership, civic engagement, and social justice. Students studied her example not just as a legal figure, but as a symbol of how dignity, courage, and integrity can confront systemic bias. Vanessa's story became a cornerstone for discussions on empowerment, illustrating that authority is most effective when paired with moral clarity and personal resolve. Despite the accolades, Vanessa remained humble, reflecting constantly on the lessons learned. She understood that visibility brings responsibility, and that the legacy of one courageous act is measured not only by institutional change, but by the lives it touches. She continued mentoring, speaking, and advocating, always mindful that her influence extended far beyond her chambers. Each conversation, each workshop, each piece of guidance reinforced the notion that the assertion of dignity is contagious, that courage, when exercised with integrity, inspires courage in others. In private moments, Vanessa reflected on the paradox of that first day at the precinct. What was intended as an act of degradation had, in fact, catalyzed a journey of empowerment, reform, and cultural change. She had been underestimated, humiliated, and tested, and in response, she had not only asserted her authority, but reshaped the perception of Black leadership in her community. Her hair, once a symbol of aesthetic identity, became a metaphor for resilience. Stripped temporarily, yes, but never truly diminished, for the crown of dignity is not physical. It resides in character, courage, and unwavering integrity. Vanessa also considered the future she hoped to cultivate for others. She envisioned a world where Black women in positions of authority could navigate their roles without the constant burden of proving their legitimacy. She worked to build mentorship networks, community initiatives, and educational programs that emphasized empowerment, resilience, and accountability. Each effort was rooted in her own experience, an assertion that dignity must be defended, modeled, and passed on. Ultimately, Vanessa Harper's story is a testament to the transformative power of courage, composure, and integrity. It illustrates how a single act of injustice can catalyze systemic awareness, societal reflection, and personal empowerment. Her journey demonstrates that authority is most profoundly exercised when paired with dignity, that humiliation can be reclaimed as a source of strength, and that the assertion of self-respect can reverberate far beyond any immediate circumstance. In the quiet of her chambers, reflecting on the journey from that first morning to the legacy she was building, Vanessa understood the profound truth of her experience. Her hair had been taken, yes, but her voice, her intellect, and her spirit remained untouchable. More than that, they had inspired transformation, within institutions, within communities, and within the hearts of those who looked to her as an example. She had faced ignorance, prejudice, and humiliation, and had emerged not merely unbroken, but strengthened, clarified, and empowered. Vanessa Harper's life, career, and legacy stand as a reminder that dignity, courage, and integrity are forces that cannot be taken, only asserted. The world may test them, may attempt to diminish them, but true authority resides in the unshakable assertion of self and principle. And in that assertion, Vanessa had not only reclaimed her own power, she had illuminated a path for generations to come. The years that followed were not just a continuation of Vanessa Harper's career, they were a testament to the enduring impact of courage in the face of ignorance. Her story, once confined to the walls of a precinct and the courtroom, had become a narrative woven into the consciousness of a community, a nation, and the hearts of young Black women who saw themselves reflected in her resilience. Vanessa understood that real change was not measured solely in reforms or headlines, but in the lives touched, the minds influenced, and the spirit awakened. She began each day with intention, not ritual. Dressing in her judicial robes, walking into the chambers, presiding over cases, it was all part of a larger tapestry of accountability, empowerment, and advocacy. But beyond the procedural, Vanessa carried the memory of that morning as a guiding light. Every case she heard, every young professional she mentored, every community initiative she supported was infused with the lessons of dignity, perseverance, and moral clarity. She had learned that one act of injustice, confronted with integrity, could become the seed of systemic change. Vanessa's story became an educational tool, not through textbooks alone, but through lived example. Universities invited her to speak about law, ethics, and leadership. Young students, particularly Black women, listened with rapt attention as she shared the narrative, not to instill fear, but to cultivate courage. "You will face moments where the world underestimates you," she told them, her voice calm but unwavering. "Moments where your authority will be challenged, where your dignity will be tested. But know this, your response is your power. Your integrity is untouchable." The precinct where the incident occurred was no longer the same. Policies were rewritten, officers trained in bias awareness, and mentorship programs established. Yet Vanessa never framed her story as one of revenge. She framed it as a lesson in accountability, a demonstration that systems, like people, can learn, adapt, and grow. She emphasized that justice is not simply punitive, it is transformative. It reshapes institutions, it educates, and it inspires. In her private life, Vanessa reflected often on the personal evolution the experience had catalyzed. She understood that the moment of humiliation, the shaving of her hair, had been a pivotal juncture. What was intended as an act of degradation had paradoxically revealed her own resilience, sharpened her clarity, and amplified her voice. She embraced her identity with renewed vigor, her intellect, her authority, her heritage, and her presence all unassailable. The crown she wore was no longer physical. It was moral, intellectual, and indomitable. Community organizations recognized her contributions. She collaborated with advocacy groups, legal aid societies, and mentorship programs to establish initiatives that addressed both systemic bias and personal empowerment. Vanessa's story became a framework for understanding how individual courage intersects with institutional reform. She demonstrated that one person's steadfastness could ripple outward, creating waves of influence across neighborhoods, cities, and professional networks. Yet, perhaps the most profound impact of her story was emotional. People saw themselves in Vanessa, not merely as a judge, but as a representation of dignity in the face of adversity. Letters arrived from individuals recounting their own encounters with discrimination, fear, and marginalization. Many expressed gratitude for the courage her story inspired, for the validation it offered, and for the model of resilience it provided. Vanessa responded personally whenever possible, offering guidance, encouragement, and affirmation. Her life had become both professional and personal mentorship, a living legacy of empowerment. Vanessa also reflected on the paradox of power. She had authority in the courtroom, but the true measure of her influence lay beyond formal titles. It resided in the quiet, unyielding assertion of her dignity, in the mentorship she provided, in the systemic awareness she fostered, and in the courage she modeled for others. Power, she realized, is not conferred. It is lived. It is the sum of actions, integrity, and the consistent refusal to allow external circumstances to dictate one's sense of self-worth. The symbolic resonance of the shaved hair became central to her narrative. Initially a tool of humiliation, it evolved into a metaphor for the resilience of Black women. Vanessa often reflected on this with those she mentored. Sometimes the world will try to strip you of what it believes is your power. But true strength is not in what they can take from you. It is in what you carry within. Your dignity, your intellect, and your courage, they are untouchable. This lesson became a cornerstone of her outreach, a guiding principle for future generations. As she presided over her cases, Vanessa also incorporated lessons of empathy and accountability into her rulings. She encouraged restorative justice approaches, advocated for procedural fairness, and made clear that bias, whether overt or subtle, would be scrutinized. Her courtroom became not just a space for legal resolution, but a platform for moral and social instruction. Those who appeared before her understood immediately that they were in the presence of someone whose authority was rooted not in intimidation, but in integrity, intellect, and experience. Years later, as Vanessa Harper reflected on her journey, she recognized a truth that transcended the particulars of her experience. Courage, dignity, and resilience are contagious. They inspire others to act, to resist, and to claim their rightful authority. She had faced humiliation, systemic ignorance, and bias, and in doing so had created ripples of transformation. Her story became a living lesson, proof that even in the face of deliberate degradation, a person could rise with strength, clarity, and an unassailable sense of self. In the quiet moments when she looked into the mirror, Vanessa no longer saw the memory of that first day as a mark of shame. She saw it as a symbol of transformation, an emblem of resilience, and a reminder that dignity cannot be stripped. It can only be claimed, reinforced, and shared. Her life, her story, and her actions demonstrated that real power lies not in external validation, but in the consistent assertion of principle, integrity, and self-respect. And so, Vanessa Harper's legacy continues, not just in law, not just in policy, but in the hearts of all those who have witnessed or been inspired by her journey. She proved that courage can redefine institutions, resilience can inspire communities, and integrity can transcend circumstance. Her story stands as a testament to the enduring strength of Black women, a beacon of hope, empowerment, and moral clarity for generations to come. In the end, the narrative of that morning, the clippers, the humiliation, the disbelief became more than a personal anecdote. It became a symbol of resistance, a lesson in dignity, and a blueprint for transformation. Vanessa Harper had faced ignorance, prejudice, and disrespect, and emerged not diminished but magnified, a living embodiment of resilience, authority, and unbreakable spirit. Her crown was no longer visible, yet it was undeniable. She wore it every day in her presence, her decisions, her mentorship, and her unyielding commitment to justice. Vanessa Harper's story is a reminder that true strength is not in the temporary control others may attempt to assert over us, but in the enduring power of character, courage, and the unwavering defense of dignity. And in that power, she found not only justice for herself, but a path for others, a legacy that could never be taken, only followed, respected, and carried forward. Even as the years passed, Vanessa Harper's experience continued to reverberate, not only through her professional life, but in the hearts and minds of those who had followed her story. The incident at the precinct had become a defining moment, not one of victimhood, but of courage, wisdom, and moral authority. Each time she walked into the courtroom, she carried with her the weight of history, the lessons of resilience, and the unshakable conviction that dignity is never granted, it is asserted and maintained. Vanessa had come to understand that true empowerment is both personal and communal. While she could assert her authority in the courtroom, the broader work, mentorship, advocacy, and systemic reform required patience, persistence, and vision. She cultivated networks of young professionals, lawyers, and community leaders, emphasizing the importance of documenting injustice, asserting rights calmly yet firmly, and transforming personal adversity into a catalyst for societal awareness. Her story became more than a cautionary tale. It became a blueprint for empowerment. In her private moments, Vanessa reflected on the lessons she had internalized. The humiliation she had endured had forced her to confront vulnerability, fear, and anger, but it also revealed the depth of her resilience. She realized that strength is not the absence of emotion, but the mastery of it. Courage is not the absence of fear, but the decision to act with integrity despite it. And dignity, true, unassailable dignity, cannot be taken away by the ignorance or malice of others. It is rooted in character, in self-respect, and in the deliberate assertion of principle. Her influence extended into public policy and law enforcement reform. Officers who had once underestimated the power of accountability now served as examples of institutional change. Training programs in bias awareness, cultural competency, and ethical conduct became mandatory, inspired in part by Vanessa's experience. She had transformed a personal ordeal into a public lesson, illustrating that systemic transformation often begins with the courage of one individual who refuses to accept injustice silently. Vanessa's personal outreach continued to expand. She participated in seminars, community workshops, and educational programs, speaking to audiences of all ages. Young Black women in particular found in her a figure of both inspiration and guidance. She emphasized that challenges were inevitable, that prejudice could appear in subtle or overt forms, but that the assertion of one's dignity and authority was the ultimate act of defiance against systemic ignorance. You cannot control how others act, she would say, but you can control your response. Your integrity is your shield. Your courage is your power. The symbolic resonance of her hair, the crown temporarily taken, remained a central metaphor in her narrative. What had been intended as an instrument of humiliation had become a testament to resilience. It reminded her and others that identity, authority, and dignity are internal, not contingent upon appearance. Vanessa often shared this lesson publicly, encouraging individuals to reclaim symbols of self-worth in whatever form they needed. She framed the experience not as an insult, but as a revelation of the enduring strength that lies within every individual who refuses to be diminished. In her chambers, Vanessa continued to preside with the same meticulous care she had always demonstrated, but now with an added layer of moral clarity born from lived experience. Her rulings reflected a balance of law, fairness, and empathy, underscoring that justice is not blind to context, experience, or societal bias. Colleagues and litigants alike recognized the depth of her authority, not only as a judge, but as a moral compass, a mentor, and a symbol of resilience. Vanessa also devoted time to cultivating her legacy. She helped establish mentorship programs specifically designed for Black women entering law, politics, and other positions of leadership. She guided young professionals in navigating systemic challenges, documenting experiences of bias, and asserting authority with both intelligence and courage. Through these efforts, Vanessa ensured that the lessons learned from her ordeal would not be lost, but instead institutionalized and shared, empowering the next generation to claim their space in the world unapologetically. Yet perhaps the most profound impact of Vanessa Harper's story was the emotional resonance it carried. It validated the lived experiences of countless individuals who had faced discrimination or disrespect in professional and personal spaces. It offered a model of how to respond with dignity, how to transform humiliation into empowerment, and how to use one's position, voice, and intellect to effect meaningful change. Her story became not just a reflection of personal triumph, but a beacon of collective resilience, inspiring courage and self-respect across communities. In quiet moments of reflection, Vanessa recognized the paradox of her journey. What had been intended as degradation, the clippers, the humiliation, the assumptions of ignorance, had instead catalyzed a narrative of power, dignity, and legacy. She had been underestimated, tested, and humiliated, yet emerged magnified, her authority strengthened, her influence extended, and her spirit unbroken. She realized that true legacy is not measured by the absence of adversity, but by the response to it and the positive transformation it inspires in others. Ultimately, Vanessa Harper's life and story serve as a testament to the enduring power of resilience. They demonstrate that authority, integrity, and courage are inseparable from one's ability to confront injustice without surrendering dignity. They illustrate that humiliation, when met with clarity and resolve, can be transformed into empowerment, and that one person's courage can reverberate across institutions, communities, and generations. Vanessa's legacy continues to inspire. Her story reminds us that the assertion of dignity is a daily choice, that courage is cultivated through action, and that the unyielding defense of self-respect is the foundation of both personal and societal transformation. She proved that even when the world seeks to diminish us, true authority and strength remain untouchable, residing within the integrity of our character and the clarity of our purpose. And so, Vanessa Harper's journey reaches its culmination not in revenge, nor in mere survival, but in enduring empowerment. She stands as a living testament to the power of resilience, the necessity of dignity, and the capacity of one courageous individual to ignite change, inspire others, and leave a legacy that no act of ignorance, malice, or prejudice can erase. Her crown is invisible yet undeniable, worn every day in her presence, her decisions, her mentorship, and her unbreakable spirit, a crown that will endure for generations to come. Vanessa Harper's journey, from that first morning at the precinct to the far-reaching impact of her story, had become a testament not only to her own resilience, but to the power of principled courage. She had faced humiliation, prejudice, and ignorance head-on, and in doing so had illuminated the path for countless others. Her story had evolved into a living narrative of empowerment, one that demonstrated the enduring strength of dignity, integrity, and moral authority. In communities across the city, and eventually the nation, Vanessa's example inspired conversations about systemic bias, representation, and accountability. Schools invited her to speak about leadership and self-respect, while young Black women reached out to express how her story had given them the courage to assert their own authority. Vanessa understood that this was the true measure of her legacy, not in headlines or awards, but in the lives transformed and the courage awakened in others. Her mentorship programs flourished, becoming incubators for future leaders who were taught not only the law, but the principles of dignity, self-assertion, and moral clarity. These programs emphasized documentation, strategy, and the deliberate cultivation of authority, ensuring that the next generation could navigate systemic bias without compromising their integrity. Vanessa had transformed her personal ordeal into a blueprint for empowerment, demonstrating that even the most painful experiences could yield enduring influence. Vanessa also reflected on the symbolic nature of her experience. The shaving of her hair, once a tool of humiliation, had become emblematic of resilience, strength, and reclamation. She often shared this lesson with those she mentored. What is taken from you does not define you. Your authority, your dignity, and your courage are inherent. No act of ignorance or malice can touch them unless you allow it. They are yours to assert and to uphold. The metaphor resonated, becoming a rallying point for those confronting their own challenges, reminding them that true power resides within. Institutionally, Vanessa's influence reshaped practices and policies. Law enforcement agencies implemented anti-bias training, cultural sensitivity programs, and procedural safeguards to prevent the kind of humiliation she had endured. Her case became a reference point for discussions on professional conduct, accountability, and the role of systemic reform in protecting dignity and authority. Vanessa had proven that the measured assertion of justice and the strategic documentation of wrongdoing could lead to meaningful, structural change. Yet beyond policy and procedure, the emotional resonance of her story remained profound. Individuals across professions, communities, and generations saw in Vanessa a mirror of their own potential. She embodied the idea that one could confront injustice not with retaliation, but with strategic authority, calm assertiveness, and unwavering self-respect. Her narrative became both a guide and an inspiration, showing that dignity, once reclaimed, can empower not just oneself, but others. Vanessa's own reflection on the journey revealed the depth of her personal growth. She recognized that true leadership requires embracing vulnerability, acknowledging the pain of injustice, and transforming that pain into action. Courage, she understood, is not simply the absence of fear. It is the deliberate choice to act with integrity and clarity despite it. And dignity, she realized, is a force that cannot be taken. It is asserted, maintained, and shared. As she looked back on the incident that had once threatened to define her, Vanessa saw it now as the catalyst for an enduring legacy. The Clippers, the humiliation, and the officer's ignorance had inadvertently illuminated her strength, sharpened her authority, and amplified her voice. She had turned what could have been a moment of degradation into a lifetime of empowerment, for herself, for her mentees, and for countless others who would follow in her footsteps. In the courtroom, Vanessa continued to preside with the same precision and fairness that had defined her career, but now with an added layer of moral clarity born from experience. Her rulings, mentorship, and public speaking carried lessons not only of law, but of life. She taught that integrity is non-negotiable, that courage is a daily practice, and that empowerment comes from recognizing the inherent strength within oneself. Her courtroom became both a space of justice and a platform for teaching the principles that had guided her through adversity. The broader community recognized her as a symbol of resilience. Leaders, educators, and activists cited her story as evidence of how individual courage can reshape institutions and inspire collective change. Vanessa had demonstrated that personal adversity, when met with strategic action and unwavering dignity, could ripple outward to produce systemic impact. Her journey exemplified the power of moral authority and the enduring effect of principled courage on society. Even in quiet moments, away from the public eye, Vanessa reflected on the profound truth of her experience. The incident that had once seemed so isolating had become a source of strength, a reminder that the assertion of dignity is always possible, and that courage, once exercised, creates waves that extend far beyond the individual. She recognized that her legacy was not simply the policies changed, the mentorship given, or the speeches delivered. It was the inspiration she instilled in others, the courage she awakened, and the empowerment she modeled through example. Ultimately, Vanessa Harper's life and story stand as a testament to the unassailable power of integrity, resilience, and moral courage. She faced ignorance and malice, and yet she emerged not only intact but magnified. Her authority strengthened, her influence broadened, her legacy secured. The crown that had been taken from her was restored, not on her head, but in her spirit, in the lives she touched, and in the enduring inspiration she provided to generations to come. In the end, Vanessa's journey offers a universal truth. True authority, dignity, and strength are not contingent upon recognition or external validation. They are inherent, cultivated through action, and demonstrated through principled resilience. Her story reminds us that even in the face of deliberate degradation, the human spirit can assert itself, transform adversity into empowerment, and leave an enduring legacy. Vanessa Harper's name became synonymous with courage, dignity, and uncompromising integrity. Her story, once a personal ordeal, became a narrative of societal awakening, mentorship, and empowerment. She proved that even when stripped of symbols of authority, one can reclaim power through clarity, composure, and moral conviction. And in reclaiming her power, she illuminated a path for others, one where dignity is asserted, courage is cultivated, and resilience is celebrated. As the final chapter of her story unfolds, Vanessa Harper's legacy endures. It is a beacon for those who face prejudice, a guide for those navigating professional and personal challenges, and a testament to the unbreakable strength of Black women. Her crown, now invisible but undeniable, remains ever present, worn daily in her presence, her decisions, her mentorship, and her unyielding spirit. And in that enduring presence, the world sees not only a woman who survived, but a leader who transformed injustice into inspiration, humiliation into empowerment, and adversity into a lasting legacy. A legacy that will continue to inspire, guide, and uplift generations for years to come.